John Miller had always lived close to the earth. His hands were calloused from years of working the soil, and his heart carried the weight of a legacy that stretched back generations. The farm in rural Nebraska wasn't just a place where crops grew. It was a piece of history, a story written in rows of corn and soybeans. But by 2023, the story seemed to be coming to an end. Years of drought, falling crop prices, and mounting debts had worn him down. The land that once promised prosperity now felt like a burden too heavy to bear. On a crisp autumn morning, John sat on the porch of the old farmhouse, staring at a letter he didn't want to open. The envelope was plain white, but its contents weighed heavily even before he broke the seal. Laura, his wife, came out with 2 cups of coffee, setting one down beside him. She didn't say anything at first, just watched as he turned the envelope over in his hands. "You might as well read it," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "Whatever it says, we'll figure it out." John sighed and opened the letter. He scanned the words quickly, though he already knew what it would say. Foreclosure. The bank wanted the farm. After months of trying to negotiate, after selling off equipment and cutting every possible expense, there was nothing left to give. The farm was being taken away. John stared at the paper, the letters blurring as tears welled up in his eyes. He blinked them away, ashamed to let Laura see him cry. "This can't be happening," he muttered under his breath. "This is supposed to be ours. It's been in my family for over 100 years. Laura reached out and touched his arm. "I know," she said, "but maybe this is a chance to start fresh. We could sell the Airstrip, use the money to—" "No," John interrupted sharply, surprising even himself with the force of his tone. He softened his voice before continuing. "The Airstrip stays. That's the one thing they can't take from us." The Airstrip was a long strip of dirt that ran alongside the fields, a relic from another time. John's grandfather had built it during World War II, when pilots trained nearby and needed somewhere to land. Over the decades, it had fallen into disrepair, used only occasionally by crop dusters or hobbyist pilots. It wasn't much, but it was protected by old zoning laws that made it exempt from foreclosure. For John, it represented more than just a patch of land. It was a connection to his past, a reminder of who he was. Laura didn't argue, though she looked worried. She knew how stubborn John could be, especially when it came to the farm. Still, she couldn't help but wonder if holding on to the Airstrip was worth it. They barely had enough money to keep food on the table, let alone maintain something that brought in no income. But she also knew better than to push him too hard. Instead, she changed the subject. "What about Ethan?" she asked. "He's going to need new school clothes soon, and winter's coming." John nodded absently, his mind racing. He hated feeling so powerless, so unable to provide for his family. Ethan was only 15, but he already worked harder than most adults. Every evening after school, he helped John with whatever chores needed doing, whether it was fixing fences or stacking hay bales. The kid never complained, but John could see the toll it was taking. There were dark circles under Ethan's eyes, and his shoulders slumped more than they should for someone so young. Later that day, John drove into town to meet with the bank manager. He didn't expect miracles, but he hoped to negotiate some kind of extension or payment plan. The meeting went about as well as he'd feared. The manager, a middle-aged man named Richard, was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, John," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "We've done everything we can. If you can't pay the balance by the deadline, we'll have no choice but to proceed with the foreclosure." John clenched his fists under the table, forcing himself to stay calm. "Isn't there anything else I can do, any way to buy more time?" Richard shook his head. "I wish there were, but the numbers don't lie. You're underwater, John. Holding on any longer will only make things worse." The ride home was silent, the weight of the conversation pressing down on John like a storm cloud. When he pulled into the driveway, Ethan was outside chopping wood. Despite the chill in the air, sweat soaked through his shirt. John got out of the truck and walked over, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Take a break," he said. "You've done enough for today." Ethan wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "Is everything okay, Dad?" John hesitated, unsure how much to tell him. In the end, he decided honesty was the best policy. Nobody. Things aren't great right now, but we'll get through it, we always do. That night, as the family sat around the kitchen table eating dinner, John tried to focus on the positives. At least we still have the airstrip, he said, attempting a smile. Maybe we can find some way to make it useful again. Ethan perked up at that. Like what? Well, John trailed off, unsure. Maybe we can rent it out to pilots or something. People are always looking for places to land. Laura raised an eyebrow. Do you really think anyone would want to use our little strip of dirt? It's worth a shot, John replied. We don't have many other options. The next morning, John woke early and headed out to the airstrip. He hadn't been out there in weeks, and the sight of it hit him like a punch to the gut. Weeds sprouted between cracks in the dirt, and the windsock hanging from a rusted pole looked ready to fall apart. It was a far cry from the bustling hub of activity it had once been. Still, John rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He borrowed the tractor to smooth out the surface, pulling weeds by hand when necessary. By mid-afternoon, he was exhausted, but the airstrip looked marginally better. As he leaned against the tractor, catching his breath, a pickup truck rumbled down the dirt road leading to the strip. John squinted against the sun, trying to make out the driver. The truck pulled to a stop and a man stepped out. He was tall and lean, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. Afternoon, the man said, tipping his hat. Name's Bill Carter. I heard there's an airstrip around here. Mind if I take a look? John straightened up, brushing dirt off his jeans. Sure thing. It's not much to look at, but it gets the job done. Bill wandered over to inspect the runway, nodding approvingly. Not bad. Could use a bit of work, but it's serviceable. I teach flying lessons, you see. Always on the lookout for places to practice takeoffs and landings. You mind if I use it? John hesitated. Renting out the airstrip hadn't been part of his original plan, but desperate times called for desperate measures. How much are you willing to pay? He asked. They settled on a modest fee, and Bill promised to return the following week. As the truck disappeared down the road, John felt a flicker of hope for the first time in months. Maybe the airstrip really could be their lifeline after all. Over the next few weeks, Bill became a regular visitor. He brought students eager to learn the basics of flying, and the sound of small planes buzzing overhead became a familiar part of life on the farm. Ethan loved watching the planes come and go, peppering Bill with questions whenever he had the chance. Even Laura started to warm up to the idea, though she still worried about how they'd manage financially. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John stood at the edge of the airstrip, watching a plane disappear into the distance. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to imagine a future where things weren't quite so bleak. The road ahead would be tough, but he had his family, his determination, and a dusty old airstrip that refused to give up. After the foreclosure, life on the Miller farm changed in ways John hadn't anticipated. The fields that once stretched endlessly now seemed smaller, quieter, almost hollow. What remained was a fraction of what they'd once owned, a few acres of land, the old farmhouse, and the airstrip. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep John going. He threw himself into odd jobs around town, doing whatever he could to bring in money. Laura took shifts at the local diner, her hands busy with plates and coffee pots while her mind stayed fixed on the family's struggles. Ethan, their teenage son, pitched in too, mowing lawns, shoveling snow, and helping neighbors fix fences. Together they scraped by day. The airstrip became John's sanctuary, while the rest of the farm felt like a reminder of everything they'd lost. The strip of dirt gave him something to hold on to. Every morning, before heading into town for work, he spent an hour or two tending to it. He graded the surface with the tractor, pulled weeds by hand, and checked the windsock to make sure it was still standing. It wasn't glamorous work, but it gave him purpose. Sometimes, when he stood at the edge of the runway, he imagined his grandfather walking the same path decades ago, watching planes come and go. The thought made him feel connected to something bigger than himself. Bill Carter quickly became a regular visitor. His flying lessons brought a steady trickle of income, though not nearly enough to solve all their problems. Still, every little bit helped. Bill was easy to talk to, a man who seemed to understand hard work and tough times without needing to say much. He often stayed after his lessons to chat with John, sharing stories about his years as a pilot and offering advice whenever he could. One afternoon, as they sat on the tailgate of Bill's truck sipping thermos coffee, Bill mentioned that he knew other pilots who might be interested in using the airstrip. "You've got a good thing here," Bill said, gesturing toward the runway. "A lot of folks are looking for places like this, quiet, out of the way, no red tape." John nodded thoughtfully. "I wouldn't mind more visitors as long as they're careful. This place means a lot to me." "Understood," Bill replied. "I'll spread the word. Just don't go charging too much. These guys aren't exactly rolling in cash either." True to his word, Bill started sending people John's way. A retired airline pilot named Harold began using the airstrip to practice touch-and-go landings in his Cessna. A group of hobbyist pilots from a nearby town rented it for weekend fly-ins, bringing picnic baskets and folding chairs. Even a couple of crop dusters stopped by occasionally, grateful for a convenient place to refuel. Slowly but surely, the airstrip came alive again. For Ethan, the change was magical. Before, the farm had been a lonely place, especially since he didn't have many friends his age nearby. Now there were always new faces around, pilots, students, mechanics tinkering with engines. He loved listening to their stories, asking questions about how planes worked and what it felt like to soar through the sky. One Saturday, Harold let Ethan sit in the cockpit of his Cessna and showed him the controls. Ethan's eyes lit up as he gripped the yoke, pretending to steer the plane down the runway. "You ever think about learning to fly?" Harold asked, smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. Ethan glanced at his dad, unsure how to answer. "Maybe," he said finally. "If we can afford it." John overheard the exchange and felt a pang of guilt. Flying lessons were expensive, far beyond what they could afford right now. But seeing the excitement in Ethan's eyes made him wonder if maybe, someday, they could make it happen. For now, though, he kept quiet, focusing on keeping the airstrip running smoothly. Laura, meanwhile, found herself drawn to the growing community around the airstrip. She started baking pies and cookies to sell to visitors, setting up a small table near the hangar where people could grab a snack or a cup of coffee. Her homemade treats quickly became popular, and soon she was taking orders from pilots who wanted to stock up before heading back on the road. It wasn't much, but it gave her a sense of accomplishment, a reminder that she still had skills to offer. Despite the improvements, life wasn't easy. Money was tight, and there were days when John wondered if they'd ever truly recover from the foreclosure. Some nights, lying awake in bed, he replayed the bank meeting in his head, wondering if he could have done something differently. Other times, he worried about Ethan's future. The boy deserved better than this, a chance to dream big and chase those dreams without worrying about money or survival. One crisp November morning, John woke early to find frost covering the ground. He bundled up and headed out to the airstrip, determined to clear away any ice that might have formed overnight. As he worked, he noticed a strange sound in the distance, a low hum that grew louder with each passing second. At first, he thought it was just another plane approaching, but then he realized it didn't sound like anything he'd heard before. It was deeper, louder, almost thunderous. Squinting toward the horizon, John saw a massive shape descending from the sky. His heart skipped a beat. Whatever it wasn't a small private plane or even one of the crop dusters he was used to seeing. This was something huge, something military. Panic surged through him as the aircraft drew closer, its shadow blotting out the sun. "What in the world?" he muttered under his breath. The plane touched down smoothly, kicking up clouds of dust as it rolled along the makeshift runway. John stood frozen, watching in disbelief as the behemoth came to a stop just a few hundred feet away. Soldiers spilled out of the aircraft, moving efficiently despite the chaos of the unexpected landing. One of them approached John, a woman with sharp features and a confident stride. She introduced herself as Captain Rachel Dawson and explained that the Air Force had been conducting training exercises nearby when mechanical issues forced them to seek an emergency landing site. "We didn't mean to cause any trouble," she said, her tone apologetic but firm. "Your airstrip saved us today." John blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "You landed a C-17 on my airstrip?" he asked, pointing at the massive plane behind her. Captain Dawson nodded. "We didn't have a choice. Believe me, we appreciate it." As the soldiers set up temporary tents and equipment, John couldn't help but marvel at the scene unfolding before him. The quiet, dusty airstrip he'd fought so hard to preserve was suddenly teeming with activity. Helicopters buzzed overhead, delivering supplies and personnel. Engineers swarmed around the C-17, inspecting its systems and working to repair whatever had gone wrong. It was surreal, like something out of a movie. Over the next few days, John learned more about the Air Force crew and their mission. They were part of a special operations unit, conducting exercises in preparation for deployment overseas. The mechanical issue that had forced them to land turned out to be minor, a faulty fuel pump, but regulations required them to address it immediately. John found himself drawn into conversations with Captain Dawson, who seemed genuinely interested in the history of the airstrip and the challenges John had faced in preserving it. "I've seen a lot of private airstrips in my time," she said, one evening as they watched the sunset together. "But yours is special. There's character here, resilience. You should be proud." John smiled faintly, though pride wasn't the emotion he felt most strongly. Gratitude, maybe. Relief, definitely. But also a lingering sense of uncertainty. What would happen once the Air Force left? Would the airstrip return to its quiet existence, or had this moment changed everything? By the time the C-17 was ready to take off, John had begun to see possibilities he'd never considered before. Captain Dawson mentioned that the Air Force occasionally leased private airstrips for training missions, suggesting that John might qualify for such a contract. The idea was daunting. Working with the military wasn't something he'd ever imagined, but the potential benefits were impossible to ignore. With Laura's support, he decided to take the leap, filling out the necessary paperwork and submitting an application. In the weeks that followed, the airstrip underwent significant upgrades funded by the Air Force. Gravel replaced dirt, lights were installed along the edges, and a small hangar appeared at one end. What had once been a relic of the past transformed into a hub of activity, attracting not only military personnel, but also aviation enthusiasts like Bill Carter, who brought students eager to learn. The Millers' fortunes began to shift, slowly, but surely, as the airstrip became a source of stability and hope. John often found himself standing at the edge of the runway, watching planes take off and land, marveling at how far they'd come. The foreclosure had nearly broken him, but the arrival of that C-17 had changed everything. The airstrip wasn't just a piece of land anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, opportunity, and a brighter future for his family. The arrival of the C-17 had been unexpected, but it brought with it a wave of changes that John could never have imagined. For days after the massive plane landed, the airstrip buzzed with activity. Soldiers moved back and forth, setting up tents, unloading equipment and inspecting the aircraft. Engineers worked tirelessly to fix the faulty fuel pump, while helicopters hovered overhead, delivering supplies and additional personnel. The quiet dirt runway that John had spent so many hours maintaining was suddenly alive with purpose. John watched it all unfold with a mix of awe and disbelief. He couldn't help but feel out of place, like a farmer who had accidentally stumbled into a military operation. Yet Captain Rachel Dawson made an effort to include him, explaining what was happening and why. She seemed genuinely interested in his story, asking about the history of the airstrip and how it had survived for so long. John found himself opening up to her in ways he hadn't expected, sharing memories of his grandfather and the sacrifices his family had made to keep the farm and the airstrip alive. One afternoon, as they stood near the hangar watching the engineers work, Rachel turned to John with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "this airstrip is exactly what we've been looking for. A private location, away from prying eyes, with enough space for our training exercises. We lease places like this all the time." John frowned, unsure where she was going with this. "What are you saying?" I'm saying you might qualify for a contract with us, Rachel replied. If you're willing, we'd pay you to use the airstrip for occasional missions. It wouldn't be full-time or anything, but it would give you a steady income, and we'd cover any upgrades needed to bring it up to standard. John's mind raced. The idea of working with the military was overwhelming, but the financial security it promised was impossible to ignore. Still, he hesitated. I don't know, he said slowly. This place has always been just for me and my family. I don't want to lose control of it. Rachel nodded, understanding his concern. We wouldn't take over completely, she assured him. You'd still own it, and we'd only use it when necessary. Plus, the upgrades would stay even after the contract ends. Think of it as an investment, not just for you, but for your family's future. That night, John sat at the kitchen table with Laura and Ethan laying out the proposal. Laura listened carefully, her brow furrowed as she weighed the pros and cons. It sounds like a good opportunity, she said finally. But are you ready? For this, for strangers coming and going all the time? I don't know if I am, John admitted. But we need something to hold on to. If this airstrip can give us a chance to rebuild, then maybe it's worth it. Ethan chimed in, his voice filled with excitement. Dad, this is amazing. Imagine all the planes that will come here. Maybe I can learn to fly someday. The thought of Ethan pursuing his dream gave John a glimmer of hope. After much discussion, they decided to move forward. John signed the agreement, officially turning the airstrip into a sanctioned training site for the Air Force. Within weeks, the transformation began. Gravel replaced the dirt surface, creating a smoother, more durable runway. Lights were installed along the edges, allowing for nighttime operations. A small hangar appeared at one end, stocked with tools and equipment provided by the military. Even the windsock was replaced with a sturdier version that swayed proudly in the breeze. The upgrades weren't just cosmetic, they signaled a new chapter for the airstrip and the Miller family. As the improvements took shape, John found himself drawn deeper into the world of aviation. He started learning about different types of aircraft, their capabilities, and the intricacies of flight operations. Pilots and mechanics shared their knowledge freely, treating him like part of the team. Bill Carter, who had introduced him to flying lessons months earlier, joked that John was becoming an expert. Next thing you know, you'll be teaching people how to land planes, he teased. Laura also embraced the changes, expanding her little cafe inside the hangar. What had started as a side project selling pies and cookies grew into a bustling operation. She added sandwiches, soups, and fresh-baked bread to the menu, catering to both military personnel and civilian visitors. Her warm personality and delicious food quickly earned her a loyal following. On weekends, the hangar felt more like a community center than a storage space, with laughter and conversation filling the air. Ethan thrived in the new environment. He spent every spare moment around the airstrip, soaking up information like a sponge. Pilots let him sit in cockpits, mechanics showed him how engines worked, and soldiers taught him basic survival skills during downtime. His fascination with flying deepened, and he began talking seriously about earning his pilot's license. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Ethan broached the subject. Dad, I really want to learn to fly, he said, his voice tinged with nervousness. I think I could do it. With the money we're making now, maybe I could start taking lessons. John exchanged a glance with Laura, who smiled encouragingly. If that's what you want, we'll figure it out, John said. Just promise me you'll work hard and not give up. Ethan beamed, his gratitude shining through. Thanks, Dad. You won't regret it. As the months passed, the airstrip became more than just a piece of property. It became a lifeline for the Millers. The financial stability allowed them to pay off lingering debts and begin restoring parts of the farm. Fields that had lain fallow for years were planted again, bringing back the familiar rhythm of planting and harvesting. John hired a few local workers to help with the crops, giving him more time to focus on the airstrip. Laura continued running the cafe, which became a beloved fixture in the community. Even Ethan found balance, juggling schoolwork with his passion for aviation. But perhaps the most profound change was in John himself. The man who had once felt defeated by life's challenges now radiated confidence and determination. He no longer saw the airstrip as merely a relic of the past. It was a bridge to the future, a testament to resilience and adaptability. The foreclosure had taken much from him, but it hadn't broken his spirit. Instead, it had forced him to find strength he didn't know he had. One crisp spring morning, John stood at the edge of the airstrip, watching a group of cadets practice takeoffs and landings under Captain Dawson's watchful eye. The sound of engines filled the air, mingling with the songs of birds returning from their winter migration. Laura joined him carrying a tray of coffee and fresh-baked muffins. "Looks like you've got quite the operation going here," she said with a smile. John nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride. "Never thought I'd see the day when this old strip of dirt would save us," he replied. "But here we are." Laura slipped her hand into his, squeezing gently. "Here we are," she echoed. "And look how far we've come." Behind them, Ethan waved excitedly as a plane soared into the sky, its wings catching the golden light of the rising sun. For the first time in years, the Miller family felt hopeful about the future. The airstrip wasn't just a piece of land anymore. It was a symbol of renewal, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a way forward. The transformation of the airstrip brought more than just financial stability to the Miller family. It brought a sense of purpose. John, Laura, and Ethan found themselves woven into a tapestry of new opportunities, connections, and dreams that seemed impossible just months earlier. The once quiet farmstead now buzzed with activity, a blend of military precision and community spirit. It wasn't always easy, but it was alive in a way that made every challenge feel worthwhile. John's days began early, often before sunrise. He'd walk out to the airstrip with a cup of coffee in hand, watching as the horizon turned pink and orange. The sight of planes lined up along the runway filled him with a quiet pride. What had once been a dusty strip of dirt was now a hub of activity, a place where people gathered to work, learn, and dream. Pilots came and went, some in sleek private planes, others in sturdy military aircraft. Mechanics tinkered with engines under the shade of the hangar, while cadets practiced drills on the grassy edges of the runway. Captain Rachel Dawson became a regular presence, overseeing training exercises and ensuring everything ran smoothly. She had a knack for leadership, balancing authority with kindness. Over time, she and John developed a friendship built on mutual respect. She admired his determination to preserve the airstrip, and he appreciated her willingness to help him navigate the complexities of working with the military. They often shared stories during breaks, sitting on folding chairs near the hangar as they watched the bustle around them. "You've done an incredible job here," Rachel said one afternoon, gesturing toward the upgraded airstrip. "Not many people would have taken this chance." John shook his head modestly. "I didn't have much choice. This place is all I've got left." "That's not true," Rachel replied firmly. "You've got your family, your grit, and a whole lot of heart. Don't sell yourself short." Her words stayed with John long after their conversation ended. For years, he'd carried the weight of failure, believing the foreclosure meant the end of his legacy. But now, he realized something important. Legacies weren't about holding on to the past. They were about building bridges to the future. The airstrip was proof of that, a piece of history transformed into a foundation for new beginnings. Laura, too, embraced the changes with enthusiasm. Her cafe inside the hangar became a cornerstone of the community, drawing visitors from miles around. On weekends, families would pack picnic blankets and set up near the runway, enjoying Laura's homemade pies and sandwiches while watching planes take off and land. Local farmers stopped by to chat, sharing news and swapping stories. Even Bill Carter, who had first introduced John to flying lessons, became a regular customer, praising Laura's cooking every chance he got. "It's not just the food," Bill told her one day, leaning against the counter as he sipped his coffee. "It's the atmosphere. You've created a place where people feel welcome, like they belong." Laura smiled, touched by his words. "That's exactly what I wanted," she said. "After everything we've been through, it feels good to give something back." For Ethan, The airstrip was nothing short of magical. Every day brought a new adventure, whether it was learning how to read weather patterns from Captain Dawson or helping mechanics troubleshoot engine problems. He spent hours poring over aviation manuals, memorizing terms and diagrams. His bedroom walls were covered with posters of planes, and his shelves held model aircraft he'd painstakingly assembled. Flying wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a calling. One Saturday morning, John surprised Ethan with a gift. A flight lesson booked with Harold, the retired airline pilot who had let Ethan sit in the cockpit months earlier. Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief as John handed him the certificate. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice trembling with excitement. "Dead serious," John replied, ruffling his son's hair. "You've worked hard, kiddo. You deserve this." The lesson took place on a crisp autumn day, the sky painted in shades of blue and gold. Harold greeted Ethan warmly, guiding him through pre-flight checks and explaining the basics of navigation. As they climbed into the cockpit, Ethan's hands trembled slightly, but his focus never wavered. When the plane lifted off the ground, Ethan felt a rush of exhilaration unlike anything he'd ever experienced. From high above the airstrip, the world looked different, smaller, yet infinitely vast. It was a moment he would never forget. Back on the ground, Ethan couldn't stop talking about the experience. "Dad, Mom, you should have seen it," he exclaimed, practically bouncing with excitement. "It was amazing. I can't wait to do it again." Laura laughed, pulling him into a hug. "We're so proud of you," she said. "This is just the beginning." As the seasons changed, so did the rhythm of life at the airstrip. Summer brought fly-ins, where pilots from across the region gathered to showcase their skills and share stories. Fall saw harvest festivals, with Laura serving pumpkin pie and hot cider to crowds of visitors. Winter brought quieter moments, but even then, the airstrip remained a source of warmth and connection. Soldiers stationed nearby often stopped by, during holidays, joining the Millers for meals and laughter around the fireplace. Through it all, John marveled at how far they'd come. The farm, though smaller than before, thrived once again. Crops grew strong in fields that had lain barren for years, and the barn housed equipment purchased with the income from the airstrip. Laura expanded her cafe, adding tables and chairs outside so visitors could enjoy meals al fresco. Even Ethan's grades improved, fueled by his passion for aviation and the encouragement of those around him. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in John himself. The man who had once felt defeated by life's challenges now radiated confidence and hope. He no longer saw the airstrip as merely a relic of the past. It was a bridge to the future, a testament to resilience and adaptability. The foreclosure had taken much from him, but it hadn't broken his spirit. Instead, it had forced him to find strength he didn't know he had. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John stood at the edge of the airstrip with Laura and Ethan by his side. Planes taxied along the runway, their lights twinkling like stars against the darkening sky. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and jet fuel, mingling with the sound of laughter from the hangar. "You know," John said softly, "I used to think losing the farm was the end of everything. But now I see it differently. Sometimes endings are just beginnings in disguise." Laura slipped her hand into his, squeezing gently. "And sometimes," she added, "the best things come from the hardest times." Ethan nodded, his eyes shining with possibility. "Like the airstrip," he said. "It saved us." They stood there together, watching as another plane soared into the night sky, its engines humming like a lullaby. For the first time in years, the Miller family felt hopeful about the future. The airstrip wasn't just a piece of land anymore. It was a symbol of renewal, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a way forward. As the years rolled on, the airstrip became more than just a source of income or a symbol of resilience. It became a cornerstone of the Miller family's identity. The changes it brought were profound, reshaping not only their daily lives, but also their dreams for the future. What had started as a desperate attempt to hold on to something familiar had grown into a thriving enterprise that touched countless lives. John's role evolved from caretaker to manager. He oversaw scheduling, coordinated with pilots, and ensured everything ran smoothly. His days were busy, but he didn't mind. There was a satisfaction in knowing that the airstrip he'd fought so hard to preserve was now a lifeline for others. Farmers relied on it for crop dusting services. Aviation enthusiasts used it for weekend fly-ins, and the military continued to lease it for training exercises. Each group brought its own energy, turning the once silent runway into a place of constant motion and purpose. Captain Rachel Dawson remained a guiding presence, her visits becoming less frequent as she moved up the ranks within the Air Force. But when she did come, it felt like old times. She and John would sit near the hangar, sharing stories about challenges they'd faced and lessons they'd learned. One afternoon, as they watched cadets practice touch-and-go landings, Rachel turned to John with a thoughtful expression. "You've created something special here," she said. "Not just for your family, but for everyone who uses this place." John shrugged modestly. "I just kept doing what I knew how to do, taking care of the land." "It's more than that," Rachel replied. "You took a risk, trusted in yourself, and made something out of nothing. That's leadership." Her words stayed with John long after she left. Leadership wasn't a title he'd ever imagined for himself, but he realized she was right. By refusing to give up, he had inspired those around him, his family, his neighbors, even strangers who passed through the airstrip. It was humbling yet deeply rewarding. Laura's cafe thrived alongside the airstrip. Word spread about her delicious food and warm hospitality, drawing visitors from neighboring towns. On weekends, the hangar buzzed with activity as families gathered for meals. Children played tag near the runway, and couples strolled hand in hand along the edges of the property. Laura added picnic tables outside, strung fairy lights between posts, and decorated the space with potted plants and colorful banners. The cafe became more than just a place to eat. It became a destination, a gathering spot where memories were made. One spring morning, Laura received an unexpected letter from a local tourism board. They wanted to feature the airstrip in a promotional campaign highlighting unique attractions in rural Nebraska. At first, Laura laughed at the idea. "Unique attraction? This is just our little corner of the world," she said to John over breakfast. But John encouraged her to embrace it. "Why not? People love what you've done here. Let them see it." The campaign brought even more visitors, curious travelers eager to experience the charm of the Miller's airstrip. Some came for the flying lessons, others for Laura's famous pies, and still others simply to soak in the peaceful atmosphere. For the Millers, it was both exciting and overwhelming. Yet they welcomed every visitor with open arms, grateful for the opportunity to share their story. Ethan, meanwhile, pursued his dream of becoming a pilot with unwavering determination. With the support of his parents, he enrolled in flight school during his senior year of high school. Balancing academics and training was challenging, but Ethan thrived under the pressure. He spent weekends practicing takeoffs and landings, logging hours in small planes under Harold's patient guidance. Watching his son soar above the fields filled John with pride and a pang of nostalgia. He remembered standing in that same spot decades ago, watching his grandfather oversee the airstrip. Now the cycle seemed to be repeating itself, with Ethan carrying the torch forward. Graduation day arrived sooner than anyone expected. As Ethan walked across the stage to receive his diploma, John and Laura cheered louder than anyone else in the audience. Afterward, the family celebrated with a barbecue at the airstrip, inviting friends, neighbors, and regular visitors to join them. The evening was filled with laughter, music, and heartfelt speeches. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he stood beside the runway looking out at the crowd. "I never thought I'd say this," he began, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "But losing the farm taught us something important. It taught us how to adapt, how to find new ways to keep moving forward. This airstrip saved us, not just financially, but emotionally. It gave us hope. And now, I get to chase my dream because of it." Tears glistened in Laura's eyes as she clapped along with the rest of the crowd. John wrapped an arm around her shoulders, feeling a surge of gratitude. Their sacrifices hadn't been in vain. They had paved the way for brighter days ahead. That summer, Ethan earned his pilot's license. The ceremony was simple, a handshake from the instructor and a certificate tucked into a leather folder, but the significance was immense. As he held the document in his hands, Ethan looked at his parents and smiled. "Thank you," he said softly, "for believing in me, even when things were tough." "We always will," John replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You've got wings now, kiddo. Go use them." With Ethan's newfound freedom came opportunities for adventure. He started working part-time as a flight instructor, teaching beginners the basics of flying. His enthusiasm was contagious, and soon he had a loyal following of students eager to learn from him. Watching him teach reminded John of his own journey, the importance of patience, perseverance, and faith in oneself. The airstrip also became a hub for community events. Harvest festivals, charity fundraisers, and holiday celebrations drew people together, fostering a sense of camaraderie that extended beyond the Millers' immediate circle. Neighbors who had once drifted apart reconnected, drawn by shared experiences and common goals. Even Bill Carter, who had introduced John to flying lessons years earlier, remarked on the transformation. "This place has changed all of us," he said one evening, sipping coffee at Laura's cafe. "It's not just an airstrip anymore, it's a home." Winter brought quieter moments, but the airstrip remained a source of warmth and connection. Soldiers stationed nearby often stopped by during holidays, joining the Millers for meals and laughter around the fireplace. Children built snowmen near the runway, their laughter echoing across the frozen landscape. Laura baked batches of cookies and handed them out to visitors, spreading cheer wherever she went. Through it all, John reflected on how far they'd come. The foreclosure had nearly broken him, but the arrival of the C-17 and everything that followed had changed everything. The airstrip wasn't just a piece of land, it was a testament to resilience, adaptability, and the power of community. It had given the Millers a second chance, a chance to rebuild not only their livelihoods but also their spirits. One crisp December morning, as snow blanketed the fields, John stood at the edge of the airstrip with Laura and Ethan. The sun rose, slowly, casting a golden glow over the runway. A single plane taxied along the surface, its engines humming softly against the stillness of the morning. Ethan pointed toward the horizon, where streaks of pink and orange painted the sky. "Look at that," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. "Isn't it beautiful?" "It sure is," John replied, wrapping an arm around his son's shoulders. "And so is this place. We've come a long way." Laura nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "We have. And we're not done yet." They stood there together, watching as the plane lifted off the ground, climbing higher and higher until it disappeared into the clouds. For the Miller family, the future was bright, full of possibilities waiting to unfold. The airstrip had been their anchor through turbulent times, and now it carried them forward into a new chapter, one defined not by loss but by hope, growth, and endless skies. Years had passed since the day the C-17 landed on John Miller's airstrip, but the memory of that moment remained vivid. It was a turning point, a crack in the clouds that let sunlight pour through when it was needed most. The Millers' lives had transformed in ways they never could have imagined, and now, standing on the porch of their revitalized farmhouse, John felt a deep sense of gratitude for how far they'd come. The farm was alive again. Fields stretched wide and green under the Nebraska sun, rows of corn swaying gently in the breeze. The barn stood sturdy, its weathered wood painted fresh with care. Inside, tools gleamed from their hooks, ready for another season of planting and harvesting. Ethan had taken over much of the farming responsibilities, balancing his work as a flight instructor with tending to the crops. He moved between worlds effortlessly, his boots caked with mud one moment, polished and shining the next as he climbed into a cockpit. Laura's cafe had grown beyond the hangar, expanding into a small restaurant that drew visitors from across the state. People came not just for her food, but for the stories she told about the airstrip and its history. She served, plates piled high with homemade dishes while sharing tales of resilience, family, and second chances. Her voice carried warmth, drawing strangers into the fold until they felt like part of something bigger. On weekends, musicians played soft tunes near the runway, adding to the charm of the place. Families spread blankets on the grass, children chased each other around parked planes, and laughter echoed through the air. John spent his days overseeing the airstrip, ensuring everything ran smoothly. Pilots respected him, mechanics trusted him, and soldiers greeted him like an old friend. Captain Rachel Dawson still visited occasionally, though her promotions kept her busy elsewhere. When she did stop by, it was always with news or advice, treating John like a mentor rather than someone who had once been unsure of himself. "You've built more than an airstrip," she said during one visit. "You've built a legacy." John chuckled at the word. Legacy. It sounded grand, almost too big for a man who had once worried about losing everything. But looking out at the bustling activity, the planes taking off, the families picnicking, the students learning to fly, he realized she was right. The airstrip wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone who found joy or purpose there. Ethan's passion for flying only grew stronger. He dreamed of joining the Air Force someday, inspired by the pilots and soldiers he'd met over the years. For now, he poured his energy into teaching others how to take to the skies. His students ranged from teenagers eager to earn their licenses to retirees fulfilling lifelong dreams. Each success story filled him with pride, knowing he was helping people achieve something extraordinary. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, John walked down to the edge of the airstrip. Laura joined him, carrying a tray of cookies warm from the oven. They stood side by side, watching as a group of cadets practiced landings under Rachel's watchful eye. Nearby, Ethan chatted excitedly with one of his students, pointing toward the setting sun and explaining the importance of timing when navigating twilight skies. "This is what I wanted all along," John said softly, breaking the silence. "A place where we can live, grow, and be happy." Laura smiled, leaning against him. "And you made it happen. You held on to this airstrip when everyone thought you should let go. Look where it's brought us." John nodded, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "I couldn't have done it without you, or Ethan. We did this together." The sound of engines roared overhead as a plane soared into the sky, climbing higher and higher until it disappeared into the clouds. John watched, ego thinking about the journey that had led them here. The foreclosure had been devastating, stripping away not just their land but their sense of security. Yet it had also forced them to adapt, to find strength in adversity. The airstrip had been their lifeline, a bridge connecting past and future. As darkness fell, lights flickered on along the runway, casting a soft glow over the scene. Soldiers gathered around a fire pit near the hangar, swapping stories and laughing. Children ran barefoot across the grass, chasing fireflies. Music drifted through the air, mingling with the hum of distant engines. It was a picture of life renewed, a testament to what could be achieved with determination and love. Later that night, after the visitors had gone home and the airstrip lay quiet once more, John sat alone on the porch. Laura had gone inside to clean up, and Ethan was upstairs studying for his next teaching certification. The stars above shimmered brightly, their light reflected in John's eyes. He thought about his grandfather, the man who had first built the airstrip during World War II. Would he recognize this place now? Would he understand how much it meant, not just to the Millers, but to everyone who crossed its path? In that moment, John felt a profound connection to his roots. The farm, the airstrip, the family, it was all intertwined, threads woven together to create something enduring. He didn't need words to express it. He simply knew. This was their legacy, a story written in dirt, sweat, and hope. The following morning, John woke early to find Ethan waiting for him outside. His son held 2 cups of coffee, offering one with a grin. "Thought you might want to see something," Ethan said, nodding toward the airstrip. Together they walked out to the runway, where a new sign stood proudly at the entrance. Painted in bold letters were the words, "Miller Family Airstrip, where dreams take flight." Beneath it was a smaller plaque dedicated to John's grandfather, honoring his vision and hard work. John stared at the sign, tears welling up in his eyes. "When did you do this?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Last week," Ethan replied. "Mom helped me design it. We figured it was time to make it official." John pulled his son into a tight hug, unable to speak. When he finally stepped back, he looked at the sign again, then at the airstrip stretching out before them. Planes lined up neatly, ready for another day of takeoffs and landings. The windsock fluttered lazily in the breeze, a reminder of simpler times and endless possibilities. "It's perfect," John said finally, his voice steady. "Thank you," Ethan smiled, clapping a hand on his father's shoulder. "No, Dad, thank you. You gave us all a second chance." As the sun rose higher, bathing the airstrip in golden light, John felt a surge of peace. The struggles of the past were still etched in his memory, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they shaped the foundation of something greater, a legacy built on resilience, community, and the belief that even in the darkest moments, there was always a way forward. That afternoon, as planes took to the skies and visitors filled the cafe, John stood at the edge of the airstrip watching it all unfold. Beside him, Laura slipped her hand into his, squeezing gently. Ethan stood nearby, chatting animatedly with Captain Rachel Dawson, who had stopped by for a quick visit. "This is just the beginning," Laura said softly, echoing words she'd spoken years ago. John nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Yeah," he replied. "It sure is." And so, the Miller family continued to thrive, their lives forever tied to the humble airstrip that had saved them. It was more than just a piece of land. It was a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of perseverance, and a reminder that sometimes endings are simply beginnings in disguise. Underneath the vast Nebraska sky, surrounded by loved ones and dreams taking flight, John Miller knew they had truly found their place in the world.